I'll begin the first lecture and just to give you some highlights on why this program or why this course, as I was mentioning in my welcome address, just to understand that where there is a need and why phytochemicals have become the need of the hour and why cell biofactories for producing these phytochemicals. So you already are aware, you must have provided in your registration kit, a course manual has been provided in which the various lectures, topics have been given. So coming to the topic, it is about sustainable biomanufacturing of high value phytochemicals. Now, sustainable because we'll be talking about a process development which is greener, and which is having a low footprint, carbon footprint, and a process which is independent of nature to produce the same molecules which you extract out from the natural plants in the wild. Then we talk about the high value because many of these phytochemicals, they belong to specialized category, which initially was called as secondary metabolites. So, which are different from primary metabolites, but they are mainly used for defense and various other ecological relationships of the plant with the surroundings. So these have also been found to be very beneficial for the humankind. So therefore, they become of high commercial value to us. So the motivation behind stems from the fact that if you go back and see, the data suggests that there are more than 25% of the top 150 prescribed drugs which are belonging to, in some way, the molecules which are of plant origin. What has been projected is that we are going to see a 5 trillion market by 2050 for the herbal drugs. There'll be a 63%. So this was a report which came on the National Ayurveda Day by Ministry of Ayush, which said that 63% upsurge in the demand for the herbal products in the last decade. Now, unfortunately, most of these molecules or herbal extracts, they are being procured from nature. 70% of the harvesting which is done is invasive in nature. So many of these phytochemicals, they are coming from the various parts of the tree or plant, because of which, of the commercial interest and a lot of industrial demand, they extensively get uprooted. I'll give you an example, like for example, an anti-cancer metabolite, the lead molecule called as camptothecin. It is to be extracted from the bark of the Indian native tree, which is a small tree, which is called as Nothapodites pneumoniana. Now, in the last few decades, we have observed almost 80% decline in the population from the Western Ghats for the very reason that there is a lot of domestic and global demand for this anti-cancer lead molecule, because of which they are getting black marketed, they are getting extensively, invasively harvested, because these secondary metabolites may also be present in various other parts of the plant, but the local collectors and the vendors, they don't care, and it is extensively fully uprooted tree. So there is a time going to come where the population is going to get either endangered or critically endangered or finally extinct. Now, one of the facts of these phytochemicals is that most of these high-value phytochemicals, they have a very chemically complex structure. They have more than one chiral centers. So, if you see, these are multi-step biosynthetic processes, and total chemical synthesis of many of these secondary metabolites is either not possible, or the yields are very low, or the results ends up in a racemic mixtures of molecules, where one of them can also be toxic and harming the biological benefit which is coming out from the molecule, especially when they are present in extracts. So their chemical synthesis can be complex, and there is a lot of, because we are dependent on nature for these molecules, we are therefore dependent on the climatic conditions, the geographical conditions, what has been observed is that if you, let's say, for example, azadirachtin, it's a small it's a molecule which is used as a biopesticide and collected from Azadirachta indica, which is ubiquitous, which is present across the country. It is neem, commonly called as neem. It's a very high value biopesticide. Now, if you see its yields, which means the content present, it is generally extracted from the seeds. If you start collecting it from North India, from South India, from various parts of the country, you'll find different yields of azadirachtin in these trees or in the seeds collected from the trees. So there is it's a well-known fact that there is an impact of geographical variation and climatic variation in the yields of these secondary metabolites present in the plant. So therefore, it cannot be a uniform or a consistent supply of the product when you are depending on nature. Then what is the alternative? I gave you an example that it becomes imperative now how to find an alternative. I gave you an example of camptothecin. Now camptothecin, it is growing at the rate of 14% CAGR in the market. Now 4 drugs are already in the market which use camptothecin as the lead molecule. Now there are dozen more derivatives and conjugates of camptothecin which are under different stages of clinical trial for various cancer therapies under FDA. So there is a time wherein you will be needing more material for extraction of camptothecin. If you see the gap between demand and supply of camptothecin, it is almost 50% annual difference in the demand, global demand and supply. Now, it becomes imperative to find another solution to procure this molecule, wherein plant cell and microbial fermentation or cell biofactories will play a role which is much greener than total chemical synthesis for producing such high value compounds. Now, another advantage which comes in with these cell biofactories is that they can be cultivated in reduced time and space. If you compare it with nature, the land requirements are less. They will be cultivated under controlled environment. They are amenable to optimization, which means that there is an opportunity to tweak the metabolism of the cells to enhance the production of these metabolites. Otherwise, in nature, a plant produces plethora of secondary metabolites. You'll have, after a few slides, I'll be talking about, and in fact, Professor Nathalie is also going to talk about how complex is the plant secondary metabolism. That will give you a fair idea that it is, although it is easier said than done process, if you want one single desired phytochemical to be enhanced in the cell biofactories without compromising the primary metabolism of the cell, so that there is growth as well as production of the secondary metabolite. But nonetheless, the cell biofactories have that opportunity of tweaking and manipulation of the metabolism to divert the carbon flux more towards the desired metabolites than other secondary metabolites. And because it is a controlled environment, so it is independent of nature. Having said that, there are bottlenecks pertaining to, the minute you bring and you isolate cell lines and you bring in the form of in vitro cultures, in comparison to nature, the yields are less. So in the wild types cell biofactories, you will find that the product yields are less, but because they are amenable to optimization, we implement cellular engineering principles, we implement bioprocess optimization principles to bring the productivities comparable to or better than nature. This is just to tell you what is the opportunity which is lying ahead in the space of herbal products or phytochemicals. Government of India, it has a vision of making India as among the top 5 global biomanufacturing hubs. In fact, by 2025, that is the vision, wherein we target to touch $300 billion market by 2028. The global herbal drug market size is set to grow at the rate 11.2 CAGR and is expected to reach $50 trillion by 2050. If you see the domestic herbal market size, it's also currently at 50 billion mark, and we are also growing huge rate, which is currently 14%. Now, if you see all this, where do we stand at present? India and China, we are very rich in biodiversity. We are very rich in our ethnobotanical knowledge of medicinal plants. But if you compare ourselves with China, it's not that we are less, but practically speaking, they are holding 13% of the share, where we are holding only 2.5% of the share. So you can understand how much scope is there for us to cover this global demand. Now, Indian export is also rising, so which is a good thing for us. As I said, 70% of what is being collected is invasively being harvested, because of which there is a lot of pressure on the natural resource. Every year, this is an older data. Maybe at present the data has changed, but a few years back, 10% of high-value medicinal plants, which are accounting to nearly 65 of them, are now under various categories, either becoming vulnerable or becoming endangered, or in fact becoming critically endangered. I'll again give you an example of camptothecin, which is a very high-value molecule, even in terms of future demand. There are only 2 major plant sources commercially from where, although 16 other species are known, but commercially, to the best of my knowledge, they are being sourced in China through Camptotheca acuminata, in India through Nothapodites pneumonia. And both of them are now endangered. In fact, Camptotheca acuminata is critically endangered in China, and Nothapodites pneumonia is also now endangered. So you will come to a scenario where, with the continuous to fulfill the increasing market demand, you may end up with extinction of these plant species, which are of high value. Now, another good point to note is that because of the impurities present in these extracts or raw material, there is a huge amount of raw material which is getting rejected during the exports. So, which also indicates that there is a need to have a consistent product quality, a uniform product quality, when you are looking at international standards, to meet the international standards. Now, one of the disadvantages, if you are dependent on nature, is also a fact that it takes time for the plant or the tree to reach. Sometimes phytochemical expression is seasonal. You will not find the phytochemical of interest all throughout the year. It may be a case. There can be a scenario where only upon reaching a particular maturity, the phytochemical is expressed, depending on the need of the phytochemical in the plant. So if it is a tree, it may take almost nearly around 10 years to reach to maturity, where you can find a higher yield of the metabolite in the bark. I was talking about, again, camptothecin. Nothapodites pneumonia, it takes 7 to 8 years time to reach to maturity, where you have to non-invasively extract out it from the bark if you don't want to kill the plant. Now, where does the opportunity lie in terms of business landscape? This is a snapshot, in brief, the business landscape of herbal drugs or herbal extracts in the market. Where does the bioprocessing or cell biofactory production can play a role? If we can develop a plant cell-based bioprocess or microbial-based bioprocess for producing these phytoextracts or plant biomass or phytochemicals, then we can hugely reduce our dependencies on all these 3 areas which have been crossed here. The green area, which the biggest cross, is our dependency on natural procurement from the wild. The other 2 small boxes will be talking about our dependency on total chemical synthesis or synthetically derived phytochemicals, because these are sometimes, mostly I would rather say, I hope there are no chemists here, but mostly these are also a compromise because of the toxic byproducts or the harsh conditions or the chemicals which are required, and these are multi-step driven processes. So, non-sustainables many of the times. Then the imports, we are also, like, I'll again quote the example of camptothecin. The demand is being fulfilled even domestically by importing camptothecin as a lead molecule for the drugs in the market in India from China. So if we can come up with an indigenous technology to produce these high value phytochemicals, then we can reduce hugely our dependencies on all these three spaces. And these are the big market size or the market which is available if you come up with such an indigenous technology to cater to. The product can cater to health and wellness industry. Phytochemicals cater to food and textile industries. Phytochemicals have a role to play in cosmetic industry. There's a huge upsurge in the demand of natural products in the cosmetic industries, both internally and globally. Ayush industry, that's a well-known fact and very much aligned, and pharmaceutical industry. So there is a big available business market or opportunity for phytochemicals. Now, having said these things, I think we have laid the stage for why this technology is of importance and the current need of the hour. So, as I was mentioning, what can be an advantage of using plant cell biofactories? In fact, it also goes well with any cell biofactories, even by heterologous expression of the plant pathways in eukaryotic systems like yeast. In fact, microbes can be fungi even. We'll be talking later in the course about this. So what are the advantages? The advantages include there can be controlled supply, which means, as I was mentioning and giving an example of azadirachtin, that you collect from different parts of the country, you will find different yields. So there is no consistent product yield which is possible to fulfill the demand. By using an in vitro production platform, you have the liberty of maintaining the product quality, and it is uniform and consistent throughout the year. Green and safe technology, I don't have to talk about, it's a biotechnology. So obviously it is much greener and safer if you compare it with chemical-based synthesis. Reduced time and space, I already gave you an example. It is seasonal in nature. The tree may have to reach to a particular developmental stage to see the expression of the phytochemical. So that is also taken away in the in vitro system. Now, they are also tools for conservation, which is an added advantage. We don't, in terms of commercialization, it may not come very straight that it is a big advantage. But if you see about the future, then you are conserving the climate, you are conserving the biodiversity, and therefore there is much added benefit in terms of sustainable development with this technology. Now, because these are cell biofactories, as I mentioned, they will be amenable to process optimization. You can apply exogenously, you can manipulate media composition, you can manipulate, have additives exposed to these cells to divert the carbon flux or to enhance the production of these phytochemicals in these cells. So what are the three aspects when you are developing these cell biofactories? What are the three aspects which should be considered and which we'll be discussing during these 2 weeks of the course? One is the cell line development or the process development. So what is important is to develop a high yielding cell lines, whether it is plant cell line or it is a microbial cell line. The step one begins with developing a high yielding cell line, which also includes screening and selection. And if it is heterologous expression, then entire from de novo, how to express the pathway into the cell line, microbial cell line. Now, when we are dealing with plant cell lines, the advantage is that many of these, the pathway is there because of the totipotent nature of the plant cells. But what then we have to do in process optimization? We have to manipulate the culture conditions. We have to manipulate, that involves media optimization, that can involve environmental condition optimization, that will also involve additive additions because plant cells would require hormones. So all these additives we'll be talking about that will be required, and some elicitation strategies, how without even transforming the cell, you add these additives in the medium so as to give the signal to the cell biofactories to overproduce these molecules. I'll be coming into details of it when we'll come to process optimization part of the course. Then talking about metabolic engineering is another big wing, wherein not only plant cell biofactories, but also microbial biofactories. Professor Nathalie is going to stress upon how the heterologous expression of plant pathways in microbes, eukaryotic systems. And I will be talking about how to use this tool to overproduce plant metabolites in plant cell lines. Now, we'll also be discussing some of the case studies where, as I mentioned earlier during my talk, that the minute you generate in vitro cultures, the yield of these phytochemicals are very low. Now, this will be a hindrance in their economic feasibility. Now, economic feasibility of a bioprocess comes with high productivities. How to improve productivities? You have to have appreciable biomass concentration, and you also have to have reasonable product content per unit biomass, which is product yield per unit biomass. So both the things, how it has to be increased is also can be done using metabolic engineering tools, where how to overexpress or downregulate certain steps in the pathway, which will lead to preferential flow of carbon flux towards your desired metabolite. Then plant multiomics. This is again something which Professor Nathalie is going to stress upon, which has a huge role to play to decipher the pathways. Many of these high-value phytochemicals, even till date, their biosynthetic pathways are not fully elucidated. The biological activity is known, the potential is known, but the pathways are not fully elucidated. So that becomes a bottleneck for developing cell biofactories, because then you have your hands tight, right, in terms of the strategies which you can use to manipulate the metabolism to generate high yielding cell lines. Most of the metabolic engineering which you will see is intuitive in nature based on biosynthetic pathways. So until unless you know the steps involved, it is very difficult to, and how they are connected to central carbon metabolism. It is a hit and trial to do these experiments, and knowing that the cell factories grow slow, especially plant cells. Every hit and trial experiment will cost you time, money, resources. So how can we rationally develop metabolic engineering strategies? We'll also be discussing in this course. And plant multiomics will include all your metabolomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, how these tools can be used to decipher the plant pathways, to identify the key enzymes present, which are playing their functional role in terms of the production of the secondary metabolite. This is just a small, I would say, a schematic on what are the steps involved while developing a plant cell-based bioprocess. Any fermentation process will begin with a cell line development. So in case of a plant cell-based bioprocess, we generate cell lines from explants. I'll be talking it in detail, but just to let you know, you isolate the cell lines from the plant parts. Once you have the cell lines in hand, they become your working cell bank and master cell bank. Using these cell lines, you develop cell suspension cultures for the very fact that it is easier to scale up and optimize. So we bring them in the form of a cell suspension cultures. These cell suspension cultures at a small volume level, which generally happens at shake flask level, that is where you try to do your cell line optimization and your medium optimization. So these things are generally taken care at this shake flask level. Once your medium has been optimized, which can also include additives here, yield enhancement strategies like addition of elicitors, precursors. I'll get into the details when we come to this section. So once the shake flask parameters have been optimized, we take it to the reactor level. Why do we take it to the reactor level? Because until now, the conditions are not controlled. At the reactor scale, you are now maintaining the conditions at their optimum value, and you will be now optimizing the fermentation conditions for scalability. And you will be deciding the right scale-up criteria at the lab reactor levels to develop the technology at least to TRL 4-5 level. So in terms of technology readiness level, we start from TRL 2 to TRL 9 before you can take it to the market. At the lab scale level, with the lab scale reactors, we reach up to 4 or 5 level before the technology can be going to pilot scale validation or a pre-pilot trial for any technology transfer to happen to the market. So this is a schematic. So I was talking about the upstream part. Once your upstream has been finalized, you also have to look at the downstream processing part. The downstream part will be talking about isolation of the phytochemicals. You'll be now eventually as the course will move ahead, you'll realize how complex is the plant secondary metabolism in plants. For the very fact that nature has given them a tool. Nature knows that they cannot move and run away if there is any harm coming to them. So nature has given them an ability to produce plethora of secondary metabolites and with specificities towards that particular danger. So by natural sense, you will see a plant producing numerous plant secondary metabolites at any given time, sometimes only when that particular harm happens and sometimes all throughout. So I'll be talking about that secondary metabolism just to make you realize that at any given time, the cell carbon flux, the metabolism is being diverted to multiple products. So if you really want economical feasibility to come in, it becomes imperative to do process optimization even through cellular engineering or through culture conditions optimization to increase the productivities. Just to give you an idea, where does the world stand in terms of commercialization of plant cell fermentations? And the world is marching ahead. Every year, there are additions happening to commercial plant cell fermentation based companies to this list. Now, one of the prime members to this list, I'll be talking about Phyton Biotech. Phyton Biotech is the world's largest CGMP. They have a facility of 200,000 liter reactor. They are responsible to fulfill the 1/3 of the global market demand for Taxol. The molecule is paclitaxel. So, which is catering to various cancers. It's a drug for ovarian cancer, for lung cancer, for breast cancer. So, this is a huge demand drug, well-known molecule for cancer treatment in chemotherapy, and which is being fulfilled via plant cell fermentation by Phyton. Then Protalix, another company from Israel, which has come up with plant cells being used for heterologous expression of human proteins, animal proteins. So they are also using plant cell lines for expression of human proteins. So they have come up with a drug for Gaucher's disease for us using carrot cell suspension cultures. Then South Korea, Japan, there are many companies in these regions, even in Asia, which are now using commercial plant cell fermentation based strategies for producing various phytomolecules. I'll just in brief talk about Taxol. The story of Taxol, how it began and how did it end up in a plant cell fermentation based company. In fact, I was having a discussion and I came to know it was a spin-off from a university. So Taxol was identified in 1967 by National Cancer Institute in US from the bark of the Pacific E tree, Taxus brevifolia. It is used in inflammation and was developed as an anti-cancer agent by BMS. You can see the complex structure of paclitaxel, and this is the E tree. It's also extracted from the bark of the E tree. So just to mention, so it has started, established in 1967, the discovery happened. But actually, when did it start? See how much resource and time has gone into it. 1955, there was a huge screening project done by NCI to discover anti-cancer agents. So what did they screen? They screened 35,000 plants. By 1967, they were able to hit upon Taxol. In 1969, 10 grams of pure compound was used for all the analysis. And from where it was coming? For that 10 gram of pure compound, 1200 kgs. Can you imagine? Kilograms of the bark was used for this purpose. So if you are needing 1200 kgs of bark, how many trees will you have to harvest? 1979, the biological activity was established. 1984, the clinical trials happened, but at the first stage itself, there was a problem of supply. NCI very soon realized that to fulfill the demand, they cannot wipe out the population of plants. So then, whom to give it away to? Despite the fact that it was very clear and now established that Taxol can be a key drug to play a role in cancer therapy, they realized that 360,000 trees will have to be destroyed to fulfill the the demands of the US. 1989, then they gave it to BMS that you take this and you do whatever you want to. So then BMS invested some money, being a commercial entity, and they came up with the drug from the molecule paclitaxel. FDA approved it in 1992. 5 years exclusive marketing rights were given to BMS for this non-patentable. See, you also realize the minute it goes to commercial entities from the beginning, the cost is going to increase. So if you see the cancer treatment cost in the country, we are hugely dependent on molecules or the drugs which we import. Now, you can understand the imperative need of coming up with an indigenous technology to produce these molecules if you really want to make it affordable to the country. Now, what is the status? It is currently being produced by plant cell culture technology by Phyton Biotech, and they are catering to 1/3 of the global demand for Taxol. These are some examples of various application industries. If you talk about food, these, you can refer to this. We'll be sending these slides every day as the lecture finishes as PDFs for you people to refer to. You can yourself go and check. These are the plant species which are being commercially explored for various food ingredients. Either they are being used as pigments, or they are being used as flavoring agents, or as dietary supplements. So there is a lot of application areas in the market which phytomolecules can cater to. If you see pharmaceuticals, there are enough, and all these are commercial plant cell fermentation based entities which are producing these molecules for various purposes. So these are catering to pharmaceutical industries where you can, podophylotoxin is another anti-cancer drug. It is known from a plant which is rare in Himalayan. So it is a Himalayan plant found, which is a rare species from where you extract out podophylotoxin. In cosmetics, there is a huge upsurge, as I said, in the cosmetic markets and demand for natural products, plant-derived products. So there is a good scope there for plant cell fermentation. In heterologous protein, I gave an example of Protralix, and there are many other companies also who are now working towards expression of human or animal proteins in plant cells. Now, I want also to make you realize how complex is plant secondary metabolism, and why, even though you will isolate the cell biofactories, there will be a need to do process optimization. There will be a need to do cellular optimization of the metabolism if you really want to bring in economical feasibility in the process. In the end, you can only survive in the market if you have economical feasibility in the place. Even though with lot of good intentions, but you can only survive the competition if there is economical feasibility in the process. So how to bring in economical feasibility in the process? You need to understand many of these strategies which we will be talking about, be it additive additions or media optimizations, the requirement of hormones. One of the most promising strategies in plant cell technology to overproduce phytomolecules is elicitation. Now, elicitation is a phenomena where you give signals to the plant cells or tissues that something bad is happening. Many of these phytochemicals, which are of high value, as I said, they belong to secondary metabolism. Secondary metabolism role I'll be talking about in detail, but it has something to do with its survival. Now, if you give the signal to the plant cell that something bad is happening, what happens? That the plant metabolism will start gearing towards protecting itself. And in that course, it will start overproducing these phytomolecules of interest. So that is a non-transforming strategy which is used in plant cell culture to overproduce these phytochemicals. Now, from where, how to identify what can be the good elicitors? So where to go? You cannot just randomly do hit and trial and see, I'll add this, I'll add that, and then I'll see what is happening. That is one way of doing it, but that's a bad way of doing research. So what do? You have to reduce the hit and trial. So you go to nature, you go and find out, you get the cues from nature. Why is that produced? That molecule is produced. What is the role of that molecule in the plant? How is that molecule getting produced? If you know about these things, then you will also be able to understand the ecological relationship of the plant with its surrounding, which is guiding towards the production of this molecule. And then you exploit it in vitro conditions. Like for example, if a particular molecule is getting produced because of attack by a fungal pathogen, let's say. So what would you do? You first understand that this was being attacked by this particular pathogen and that's why this molecule is getting overproduced. So now, how will I exploit it in lab? I will use any fungal component, either dead or live. Generally, we use dead cultures because plant cells are vulnerable to contamination. The fungal, if you take it live, it will overgrow. So you take its components and you add them as elicitors in the medium, just giving the plant cell a signal, a pseudo signal in the lab that something bad is coming. It will accelerate its secondary metabolism and thereby lead to enhanced yields. So I'm just telling you in very simple terms. We'll talk about it in detail. Now, to understand that, what do we need to know? We need to know about the plant's secondary metabolism and its complexity, when and how these molecules are produced. So first, I know all of you might be knowing what is metabolism. Metabolism is sum of all the biochemical reactions which are happening in the cell, including the primary and the secondary. Now, primary metabolites are what? Primary metabolites will be all those metabolites coming from the primary metabolism, which will be responsible for its growth and development or reproduction. So these will become a part of primary metabolism. What all? For example, your lipids, your nucleic acids, carbohydrates, these are coming from the central carbon metabolism. Your amino acid synthesis, fatty acids, cell wall components, anything to do with the biomass is a part of primary metabolism. Now, plants, because they cannot move, they have significant portion of this carbon flux going into producing certain molecules which are not essential for growth and multiplication, but which means biomass, but they are essential for their survival. Survival and their ecological dependence or relationship with the surroundings, which we call as secondary metabolism. How are they different? At the biosynthetic level, there is a lot of interconnection between the primary pathways and the secondary pathways. Professor Nathalie is going to talk much more in detail about the connection between the primary and the secondary. But just to let you know, the primary and the secondary metabolites share many same intermediates. They are derived from same core metabolic pathways. Even secondary metabolism, you will find that as you keep going upstream, there are common pathways, common intermediates, and as you keep going towards the downstream, your preferred product, they will keep diversifying and keep branching out. The secondary metabolites generally occur in relatively low quantities. Can anybody answer why low quantities? Absolutely. Why would nature try to? Nature is the best engineer. Nature would always economize its resources. It will never produce anything which is of no need. So, it will either produce it only in quantities which is less burden to its primary functions. So therefore, most of these secondary metabolites are produced in low yields. Now you can imagine they are anyways getting produced in low yields, and when you bring them an in vitro culture form, they are further down. So how much there is a need to again revive the yield or get it overproduced to bring in economical feasibility, higher productivities. Now, one thing is to be noticed that these are widespread in terms of either family, genera, and even species. It is not necessary that if a plant is producing a particular secondary metabolite, any other plant nearby will also be producing that particular metabolite. Even among the species, you may find variations in the maybe a derivative or in the structure. Some modification might be happening. So therefore, the need for screening and selection of high-yielding cell lines. I gave you an example of azadirachtin. Now, azadirachtin, in one of the research which was conducted, they collected 23 different varieties of neem seeds across the country for extraction of azadirachtin. And in all those 23 varieties, the yields of azadiractins were different. And the Trivandrum variety showed the maximum yield of azadirachtin. So that became the best plant to be used as explant. Its parts became the best explants to generate highest yielding cell lines. So it's like, where do you begin before process optimization? Do you want to begin with a low yielding plant's explant which will generate a lower yielding cell line, or you would first begin with a higher yielding plant part which can presumably generate a higher yielding cell line and which should be then further taken for process optimization or cellular optimization to give you highest yielding cell line to begin with. What is the role of secondary metabolites? There are multiple roles which secondary metabolites are playing in the life of a plant. They protect the plants against getting eaten up by herbivores. They protect the plant by attack from microbial pathogens. They serve as attractants. So I was until now only talking about protection, but they are also helping the plants in attracting the pollinators, sometimes attracting the predators of their pathogens. So you will realize as I'll move on that plants do produce certain secondary metabolites which are volatile in nature or give colored cues to the predators of their attackers. So this is how it is working. So they act as attractants in the form of either odor, color, or taste for pollinators and seed dispersal animals. The secondary metabolites can function as agents of plant-plant competition. So there is a fight going on for survival, for sunlight, or there are weeds which are overgrowing on the plant. So now how to evade them? So plants do produce certain secondary metabolites through their rhizome to evade such competition. Plant microbe symbiosis. Now I'll be talking about the plant microbe interaction, which also plays a role in secondary metabolism and especially phytochemical production. It is well known that certain phytochemicals are being co-produced by the microorganisms residing in the plant and also the host plant. So they also play a role between the metabolic crosstalk which is happening between the microbes residing in the plant through the evolution and the plant. They increase the reproductive fitness of the plants. Of course, if the plant is free from any pathogens or wounds, then it is a healthy plant to grow and thereby better reproductive fitness. The ability of plant to compete and survive, therefore, profoundly is affected by its secondary metabolism and the production of secondary metabolites. Now, what are the different defensive strategies which the plant has realized or they have developed? Like us, there are some. So what plants do is they have constitutive defense and they have induced defense. From the name itself, can you guess? Some lie under constitutive defense and some secondary metabolites become a part of induced defense.
Constitutive is something which is constantly expressed and induced is expressed in response to a particular stimulus.
Absolutely, from the word itself. So again, the nature is economizing. Rather than spending all its carbon, energy, flux in one go on producing the secondary metabolites, it is economizing as and when required. They are often species specific. So this is how secondary metabolite production is. They are species specific. They can exist as store compounds, conjugate compounds, or precursors of active compounds. Now, sometimes many of these phytochemicals, because they are toxic in nature, the plant has to protect itself against the toxic nature of that. So therefore, sometimes they are stored as it is in the vacuoles mostly, or sometimes the precursor is stored, and as soon as the damage would happen, the precursor will be brought in exposure to the last step of enzymes which are in the vicinity to convert it into final products. Most of the defensive secondary compounds are constitutive defense. Now, what are induced defense? Induced defense are initiated only after actual damage occurs. They include the production of defensive proteins. For example, lectins or protease inhibitors, as well as production of toxic secondary metabolites. So this becomes a part of induced defense, which happens after the first attack has happened rather. In principle, induced defenses require a smaller investment, obviously, because they are not all the time being produced. So induced defense would require less carbon and energy of the plant to get produced. So lesser investment from the plant. Now, plants can recognize specific components of the insect. If there is a pathogenic insect, they may have certain receptors on the cell membrane which will recognize these insects so as to start overproducing these compounds. So repeated mechanical wounding is one. Can induce response similar to that of insect herbivory. Certain molecules in the insect saliva can serve as enhancers of the stimulus. That is what I was terming as elicitors. Plant can recognize these elicitors and activate a complex signal transduction pathway. So it is about the exposure. Once it is exposed, the plant has recognized. Now, the plant can be very big. The tree can be very big and the attack has happened at one point. How will the tree gear up the other parts? So what happens? The plants have devised a mechanism of this signal cascade. And sometimes the signal is sent through the vascular system to other parts. So wherein your signal molecules will play a role. Where jasmonic acid, salicylic acid, these are signaling molecules which play a huge role in this signal cascade mechanisms. Such insect-derived elicitors, they trigger the signaling pathways systematically, initiating the defense response in the distant regions of the plant. In fact, you won't realize that the plant is not only trying to send signal to different parts of the same plant, but it also sends signals to the nearby plants by making them as volatile substances. So these signaling compounds, like for example methyl jasmonate. Jasmonic acid is the signaling molecule, but its volatile ester is methyl jasmonate. And this volatile ester the plant uses to give signals to the distant relative. A major signaling pathway involved in most plant defenses is activated by jasmonic acid, and octadecanoate pathway is the pathway which is responsible for its synthesis. Now, jasmonic acid level, it will rise steeply in response to the insect herbivore damage and thereby triggering the production of many proteins or enzymes involved in plant defense. For example, jasmonic acid is synthesized from linoleic acid. Now, linoleic acid is a membrane lipid component. So, you can imagine the first exposure will happen at the membrane site, the cell. The minute it has been damaged, linoleic acid will be used to give the signal for inducing the production of jasmonic acid, which will further elicit the octadecanoate pathway. and it will further be used in the signal cascade mechanism to overproduce the synthesis of certain proteins which are involved in plant defense and production of secondary metabolites. So what does jasmonic acid do? Jasmonic acid will induce the transcription of host of genes which will be involved in the defense metabolism. Among these genes, they will encode. So what are they in the end they are trying to do? It will encode key enzymes in the major pathways for secondary metabolite synthesis. I told you that the primary and the secondary are related. There are common intermediates even in secondary metabolism. Upstream, there will be common pathways. So jasmonic acid will trigger the enzymes of these common intermediates. Several other signaling compounds including, so it is not only one direction the plant is taking, plant is using multiple ways now to protect itself towards the same purpose. It is also using other compounds like ethylene, salicylic acid, methyl salicylate, also to induce the production of secondary metabolites. This concerted action is what will give the full activation of plant defense to protect itself. Some proteins, plant proteins, can themselves inhibit the herbivore digestion. Among the diverse components by jasmonic acids are proteins that will interfere with the herbivore digestion. So, for example here, some legumes, they synthesize alpha amylase inhibitors that would block the action of the starch digesting enzyme alpha amylase. So, you can understand, any insect which will try to attack, it would have to disintegrate and want to have food from the plant. So there's a good possibility that it will have alpha amylase to do that. Now what the plant would do is, it will attack directly the enzyme which is responsible for degradation of starch. Other plant species produce lectins, defensive proteins that bind to the carbohydrates or carbohydrate containing proteins. Now what will happen after it has ingested, the herbivore has ingested, these molecules will bind to the epithelial cell lining of the digestive tract and interfere with the nutrient absorption. The best known anti-digestive proteins in plants are the protease inhibitors. They are found in legumes, tomatoes and other plants. These substances can block the action of proteolytic enzymes in the herbivore. Now there are volatiles also playing a role here. The induction and release of volatiles in response to insect herbivore damage. This includes the combination of molecules which are emitted specific to each insect. There are certain class of molecules which will be produced after they have learned. There has been repeated attack happening, so the plant is also learning. I'll be talking about ISR and SAR, how the plant learns from the first damage has happened, so that in future when the damage happens, I'm ready to face it. So typically includes representative from 3 major classes of secondary metabolites, the terpenes, phenolics and alkaloids. So most of the secondary metabolites which are involved in secondary metabolism and are part of the plant defense, their beginning happens from these 3 classes of plant secondary molecules, and further they can be combination of one or more. In response to mechanical damage, all the plants additionally will emit lipid-derived products such as green leaf volatiles. So I'm trying to tell you and give examples of different ways in which there is such a wide range of plant secondary metabolites which the plant produces at any given time as per requirement. Now these are mixtures of terpenoids and fatty acids. They attract the natural enemies. I was giving an example here, which is of the predators and the parasites of the attacking insect. So they'll create these volatile signals, and these volatile signals is just to attract the predators so as to come and attack the herbivore or the pathogen on it. The volatiles relieved by the leaf during moth oviposition, this is an example, can act as a repellent to other female moths. So what will happen? A moth has come. So first is a compromise. First compromise has been done, but now how to protect the damage. So it will produce the secondary compounds which will have an odor or a signal which will evade the others to do the same thing. Many of these compounds remain attached to the surface of the leaf and they will act as a feeding deterrent because of the bitter taste or the taste which will have. Now you must have realized some of the fruits, they are bitter in taste when they are raw. Why is the nature doing it? Because it doesn't want it to be, the fruit is still not ready for dispersal. So it wants to evade away the herbivores or to even humans. So therefore, it will create certain metabolites which will have deterrence, taste deterrence. You will not taste it. So you will not bite it. Some penetrate the cuticle, the cell wall directly by secreting lytic enzymes which digest these mechanical barriers. This is how the pathogens are strategizing to invade the plants. There's a diverse array of pathogens, so there are diverse ways of penetrating the plant. Either they will directly damage the barrier or they will make use of the wounds which are already created in nature on the plant or the openings. Openings like your stomata is an opening, lenticels are the openings. So they will make use of those openings. And sometimes the pathogens will be residing on the pollinators, the phloem feeders, for example. So once they get an entry into the vascular system, they can spread throughout the plant. This is how certain viruses spread. Phloem feeders such as whiteflies and aphids, they deposit pathogens directly into the vascular system. Thereby, they can easily spread throughout the plant. Now, antimicrobial compounds are synthesized before the pathogen attack. So which is constitutive defense. So now the plant is producing something before and the plant will also produce something after the attack has happened, such that there is a concerted effect of all these mechanisms to evade away the pathogen. Several classes of secondary metabolites have strong antimicrobial activity when tested in vitro. For example, saponins. It is a group of triterpenes which disrupts fungal membranes by binding to sterols. There's an example given here. What was found was that when saponins were made to get produced less in the mutant oat lines, they observed that they became less resistant to fungal pathogen attack. Infection induces additional antipathogen defenses. After every infection which is happening from a pathogen, the plant deploys a broad spectrum of defense against the invading microbes. A common defense is the hypersensitive response. So what happens in the hypersensitive response? First, the plant sacrifices. Some of the cells right where the point of infection has happened, they will be made to die. Why they are made to die? Any guess? Why?
Because they are toxic. So they are
No, the cells, the plant cells at the
they
point of
already have
infection.
the, virus or whatever.
So why would it not spread?
Dead cells metabolism does not take place.
So which means that now there is a mechanism by which they are deprived of the reason for which they had attacked the cells. So there is no metabolism happening, there is no synthesis of carbon source or food happening. So thereby reducing the spread, the rate of spread. Now they will do this by having a burst of certain reactive oxygen species, nitric oxide, and so such that some of them will be used to directly sacrifice the cells near the wounding site or in fact even to the attacking pathogen if they can get evaded by the reactive oxygen species generated. So the hypersensitive response is often preceded by the rapid accumulation of reactive oxygen species and for nitric oxide. Cells in the vicinity of the infection synthesize a burst of toxic compounds formed by the reduction of molecular oxygen. Active oxygen species will contribute to host cell death. So this is the sacrifice as a part of the hypersensitive response, or in fact sometimes to kill the pathogen also directly. Now another defensive response will be the formation of hydrolytic enzymes that will attack the cell wall of the pathogen. in the plant. So these will be an assorted class of glucanases, chitinases. Why chitinases, for example, if it is a fungal pathogen? Hydrolases, which will be induced if there is a fungal invasion happening. And now can you connect the dots? Why elicitors? These hydrolytic enzymes will belong to a group of proteins that are closely associated with pathogen infection, and therefore they are called as pathogenesis related proteins. So PR proteins have an important role to play in plant defense. Response of plants to bacterial and fungal invasion is the synthesis of phytoalexins. Now, phytoalexins are your plant secondary metabolites. Phytoalexins are a class of plant secondary metabolites which will have strong antimicrobial activity and which will get accumulated around the site of infection. Now, please always remember, not all plant secondary metabolites are synthesized after the pathogen attack. They are certain part of secondary metabolites which are a part of constitutive defense. Phytoalexins production will appear to be a common mechanism of resistance to pathogenic microbes in wide range of plants. For example, leguminous plants like soya bean, alfalfa, isoflavonoids are used as phytoalexins. Solanaceae plant, for example, potato, tobacco, tomato, they will produce sesquiterpenes which will become a part of phytoalexins. Their production increases after the pathogen attack. The phytoalexins are generally undetectable in the plant before the infection, but they are synthesized very rapidly after the microbial attack. Now, it also depends on the plant species. So, the probability of success to evade away the pathogen would depend on how fast the plant is able to do a concerted mechanism to protect itself, which also involves the production of secondary metabolites de novo, which means after the attack has happened. The point of control for the activation of these biosynthetic pathways will begin from gene transcription. The plant do not store any enzymatic machinery required for phytoalexin synthesis. After microbial invasion has happened, they will begin transcribing and translating the appropriate mRNAs which are required for synthesizing the biosynthetic enzymes required to produce these phytoalexins. Now, how do plants recognize? They will differ. So, sometimes you will find that some plants are able to survive, some plants are not able to survive. So, that is because they have a difference in the speed and intensity of response to these attacks. The resistance would depend on how plants sense the presence of pathogens and initiate the defensive responses. So, how quickly the plant has developed a mechanism to the first line of defense has been broken, how quickly the signal cascade mechanism is in place to do de novo synthesis of these phytoalexins and involve the various other mechanisms of protection. Plants have a variety of receptors that can recognize these associated signals. One of them, it is called as MAMPs. These are microbe associated general molecular patterns. So this is where learning is happening when there has been through generations. So if something, so plants will find certain epitopes and present it, which will identify the conserved features of that attacker. For example, flagellin receptor, which is epitope FLG22, it is a receptor which enables the plant to recognize mobile bacteria. So this is how the plant has devised ways to recognize any mobile bacteria, class of mobile bacteria, flagellated bacteria. Now, there's another example of PEP13, which is an epitope of oomycete transglutamase that enables the plant to recognize all oomycete pathogens. Oomycetes are fungus-like pathogens. This form of defensive strategies is referred to as innate immunity because plant has already learnt it through evolution. A single encounter with the pathogen may increase resistance to future attacks. When the plant survives infection by a pathogen at one site, it will often develop increased resistance to subsequent attacks. And this is called as systemic acquired resistance in the plant. It is not developed therefore very quickly. It takes time for the plant to develop this resistance. How does it develop? It develops this resistance by creating increased levels of PR proteins. We just heard about the pathogenesis related proteins. This is where it plays the role in your systemic acquired resistance. So PR proteins like chitinases and other hydrolytic enzymes, once the endogenous signals involved, so there are certain signaling molecules also involved in this, for example, salicylic acid. This will get accumulated dramatically in the zone of infection after the initial attack has happened, and then it will establish the systemic acquired resistance by synthesizing the PR proteins. Hydrogen peroxide is another compound that can accumulate at the site of infection and also becomes a part of SAR. Salicylic acid is the signaling molecule which will be used for long distance cautioning to other parts of the plant. This is just a schematic to show how the initial pathogen infection will increase the resistance for any future attack by using SAR. So generally these signaling molecules will make use of the vascular system to convey the message to other cells and tissues. Now another type of resistance is induced systemic resistance, which will get activated when not the actual pathogens have happened, but it is also activated during its interaction with the microbes. These can be symbiotic microbes, can be useful microbes in nature. But even for a useful symbiosis to happen, that particular microbe will have to infect the plant, will have to enter the plant, isn't it? Now for entering, it will have to produce certain lytic enzymes. So they become a part of the induced systemic resistance in the plant. So colonization of root zone by rhizobacteria not only stimulates the formation of root nodules, but also initiates a signaling cascade throughout the plant. This signaling cascade would involve molecules like jasmonic acid and ethylene, and thereby resulting in enhanced production of the phytochemicals, which will be useful in the future if any pathogen attack. This form of systemic defense does not involve salicylic acid as the signaling compound, as it does not induce the accumulation of PR protein. So this is how it is different from systemic acquired resistance. Certain defense measures are immediately put in place by induced systemic resistance, and other defense responses are initiated only after the actual pathogen infection. So now, can you understand the difference between ISR and SAR? So induced systemic resistance is playing a role when? It should be a part of your induced systemic resistance was not coming from actual pathogens, but from the beneficial microbes. So it is not happening after the actual attack has happened, but well before that. So it's a constitutive, can be a part of the innate defense which has happened and not the induced. The advantage of this defense strategy lies in reducing the direct investment of resources in defensive measures. So it is avoiding the usage of the resources when the plant is healthy, is not under attack, but still gearing up in case if the future attack happens, then we are prepared to produce the phytochemicals required. So this is the part of induced systemic resistance where jasmonic acid will play a role or ethylene will play a role. So this is a sum up of the secondary metabolism and its relationship with the nature in plants. you can see how many different kinds of stresses a plant can face in nature and how the plant is gearing towards protecting itself against those. So just a question for all of you, if anybody can give me the full form of HIPVs. Any guess? After whatever we have heard in this talk.
Pollination vectors.
No, a full form of HIPV. You should be able to guess after we have been discussing. Okay. Okay. Teamwork. Herbivore induced. Something, so you can also guess from the diagram itself, what can it be possibly? So I heard plants, I heard parasites. So herbivore induced parasite and so whatever we have been talking about, connect with it. We have been talking about the secondary metabolism role in the plant, and the secondary metabolism belongs to the plant. And where is it going? It's going to, so herbivore induced, somebody said some, so I'll go by the plants. So herbivore induced plant, herbivore induced plant virus, and coming from where? Volatiles. Why volatiles now? Now give me an answer. So one is done, part A is done. Herbivore induced plant volatiles. Part 2, the purpose.
Signaling molecule for the other plants. Long distance.
Herbivore induced plant volatiles. That was signaling molecules of the plant. The jasmonic acid, the salicylic acid.
Interact further attacks by the
Okay, one hint. Very good, very nice. So I was about to give a hint that is there something to do with that arrow which is coming from carnivore or predators. So you are right, you are done. So part A and part B solved. Okay, so this brings to an end to this talk. I will leave at this slide where there is an interrelationship, I said, between the primary metabolites and the secondary metabolites. And there are major 3 classes of plant secondary metabolites which belong to terpenes, phenolics and nitrogen containing, which we call as alkaloids. And they have a very important role to play in commercial applications of phytochemicals. So now the next lecture will be by Professor Nathalie, and she'll get into the details of the secondary metabolites for you.